We were delivering over 1,800 meals a week.
Wow.
Let alone the fact that at this point we had no funding at all.
Wow.
It's the story of feeding the 5,000 as God brought our community together to serve at a real point of need. I watched as God just provided in the most incredible, miraculous ways.
Mm-hmm.
We had food coming out of our ears. We literally, at one point, there was an amazing business that donated us a ton of salmon, sushi grade salmon, a ton, like a metric ton. Just the most phenomenal thing to be a part of.
Welcome, everybody. This is Simon Gilbo with Inspired. Inspired, if you're new to us, is all about meeting different mates of mine, contacts from across the spectrum of human experience that are doing beautiful stuff, that have overcome sucker punches, that have seen God at work. And, you know, we're relentlessly bombarded by negativity in the press, relentless sort of barrage of bad news that induces fear and cynicism and anxiety, all sorts of negative vibes. And we want to come against that. And there's lots of beautiful stuff. There's lots of great stories to be told. And I've got no doubt this week you're going to be inspired because we've got with us Sarah Clay. Welcome, Sarah.
Good morning. Great to be here.
So good to have you. So you're in Kingston upon Thames. You're the founder of Voices of Hope. Our link is through Steve Dauncey, my mate, who's I think you met at the Genesis Collective where you were speaking, and he just said she's fantastic. She's got a great story. So wanted to get you on. You're working with Voices of Hope is founded. It's in that area, isn't it, of Southwest London? You're dedicated to sort of bringing hope to people that have had a rough time, that have sort of fallen through the cracks, be it domestic violence, mental health, all that sort of stuff. I'm not going to say any more. Let's just launch off. What is it actually that you currently do?
Yeah, so I run Voices of Hope. So I'm the CEO of Voices of Hope, and which I absolutely love. It's probably the most exciting and challenging sector that I've ever worked in. I have a history of having worked in church, actually, for a good 10 years that I did that. And so this was a big career change for me, if you put it that way. But I love it. And as a charity, I founded it in 2019. And that was very much a local operation to start with. And it's kind of grown, actually, to being sort of Southwest London and a wider reach into the UK in some of our projects. But I think our real heart as a charity is to see transformation in lives and to be a source of like hope and inspiration to those that are really struggling, really in a dark place, or just challenging with that relentless difficulty that you come across, whether that be food insecurity or, facing difficult relationships or lack of jobs or direction, whatever it is, So I think our hope, my hope is very much that when we help people move from a position of being maybe at risk in one dimension or another, and to really help them in small or big ways to see transformation in their lives and come to a place where they're thriving, and to, be that source of hope and inspiration, really. So I've got a great staff team. They're committed, they're amazing. And we even more amazing, probably volunteer base of over 100 people. So it's grown, it's thriving. Yeah, big challenges, as I said, but love it, absolutely love it. I'm also, part of that is, as a charity, we are based actually in a church, Kingsgate Church in Kingston upon Thames. And I'm one of the leaders there and really passionate about church. I absolutely love it. And it's a family for me, an extended family, because I come from a big family anyway. So I'm a pastor's kid, which has its own fun reality of growing up in that. But pastor's kid, one of 7 children. So big family. We all love Jesus, to my parents' credit, all following God. And for me, I don't know, for me, church is that real extension of having grown up in a really beautiful family. And for me, church is family. So very, very passionate about both church and as a charity impacting the lives of people around us.
So what made you actually start Voices of Hope then?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really poignant question. I think so. I started in 2019, a year before the pandemic, and first started as an unregistered charity. And one of the amazing stories is that actually we got our registration from the Charity Commission in January 2020 in 1 week.
Wow.
If you know anything about the charity sector, to get your charity registration in 1 week is pretty miraculous. And I remember it coming through and going, God, what are you doing? Because it was so unusual. And I was like, what are you up to, Lord? Like, I feel like, there's a plan in this. And then lo and behold, the pandemic hit, and we ended up with our charity status and being able to really pivot and grow at that point and respond to the pandemic. But going back to your original question of, well, why did I start it? To be honest, I was in a really, really dark place. I was struggling in 2015, 2016 and into 17 with PTSD. PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder. And for those who aren't so, knowledgeable about that, because I wasn't at that point, that's for sure. All I can say is I felt like I'd had a personality transplant. I didn't know who I was. I am by nature a highly visionary, strategic person. I am not lying when I said I did not have one single idea. I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I was gripped with fear and anxiety. Panic attacks were a regular part of my day. And it was the most disorientating place to be in, even to the point, I've already talked about my family was such a huge part of my life and security in my life as well as my faith. But, I went through times of going, doubting my family's love for me. My head was that dark. And I just, as secure as that love is, my head was that dark. And I really had no hope at all for the future. And, there were reasons for struggling with PTSD. One of them was I'd been through quite significant personal trauma over the previous sort of few years due to abuse. And also I was struggling with a chronic long-term health condition. And I'd resigned from my job, which was working in a church. I'd been part of for 10 years. Even in that year, I think in 2015, I'd spent close to 3 months in hospital. In 2016, I lost my house where I was living. I was struggling with breakdown of friendships. I had to move. To be honest, my physical and mental health was absolutely in shreds. And I can honestly say, if it wasn't for the love and the support of those around me, especially my family, I don't think I'd actually be alive today. And I'm not being dramatic. It would, and I have no doubt that I would not be where I am right now. And I think going through that kind of darkness, and by nature, I'm quite a high achiever. And I don't say that to blow my own trumpet, but, I went to Cambridge University. I'm used to achieving. I'm used to succeeding. And to get to that point of absolute darkness, and my whole life, it felt like disintegrated. I just, having come through some of that, or working through some of that, I really realized the significance of the strength of others around you when you're in those dark places. And I think that realization that life can do that to you gave me such a heart and a passion to walk with others in that place, whether they know God or not, because it's such a privilege to be able to reveal the heart of God to those that are in that darkness, and to actually help people rebuild their hope, rebuild their trust, even rebuild their ability to trust. And I think, for me, one of the things about abuse is it completely decimates your ability to trust, because your trust is violated. And for me, it's like, can we walk alongside people and help them even build their ability to trust again? And sometimes as churches, and I think we can almost demand trust when people walk through the door. I look and I think, the very concept of saying to somebody who's walked through abuse, give your life to Jesus, give your life to this being and trust him with everything. Like, that's a hard thing for somebody to do when even their ability, that foundational ability to trust is not there. And I think with Voice of Hope, I wanted to do that long journey with people of going, let's learn again how to trust. Let's learn again that love can be safe. and can be trusted, and that people are for you without a hidden agenda behind it. Actually, we will love you because you are worthy of being loved, because God is love. And, I think about that, the fact that God first loved us.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't demand us to love him. He first loved us. And how do we first love people before they even go, yes, I want Jesus, or yes, I want to trust, or yes, I'm in a good place? How can we first love them and do that in a way that is intrinsically who God is? Like, he is love. How can we be love to people? And so that's something I'm so passionate about. And also, I am a creative and I love music. And I think I was like, God, how do we bring people together to learn to love, but also do that in a way that's creative and enjoyable, and in a neutral space that isn't intimidating to people? And so with Voice of Hope, I was like, okay, let's use music as a way to do that. And I have, a good experience of running music stuff and choirs and church worship teams and all the rest of it. So I thought, let's bring people together around something they love to do and inspire hope in the journey. And so we started with care homes and a sisterhood choir for women that had walked through abuse, and
Brilliant.
a gospel choir and a dementia choir. And so just bringing people together around something they love. And that's how we started, really simply. So I started actually by just personally running those sort of choir sessions, and it just started to grow and thrive. And before I knew it, somebody was like, let's actually formalize this and make a charity around it. And I was like, that's a really great idea. I've never been in the charity sector before that. Didn't even think I necessarily would end up in the charity sector. I've had no previous experience. So it's been a rapid learning curve, that is for sure. But yeah, seen some amazing stuff happen. So that's how we started. To be honest, that's why I started it. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I don't rejoice in the dark period you went through, but it's just so lovely that on the other side of it now you're speaking hope. And I know loads of people be listening who are going through a really dark time.
Yeah.
And you'll want them to know, won't you, that there is always hope. Just hang on in there. And you need people around you to get through that. And you can't do it on your own. Famous African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And we need to go together. And we're in a very fast-paced culture, but it's isolated, it's alone. And then when you fall, you're isolated and alone. So we need each other. Interdependence rather than, exalting independence.
I think as well, Simon, on that, I think when you get into those really dark times, especially for me, I can't speak of lots of mental health illness, but around PTSD, your mind really does alter. And by that, like, if I could have got to the place of doubting, can I be secure in my family? I mean, I cannot tell you what a big, shaking that is, for me to be able to get to that place of going, do I even feel secure in my family? My family are the most constant, loving, caring, phenomenal family. I'm so grateful to God for them. And there's lots of them as well. To be gripped, I think when you face abuse sometimes, or any other trial in life, I'm just speaking from personal experience on that one, and coupled with mental and physical, so you've got that coupling with physical health, you can get to the point where rejection can take such a massive root. Where fear can take such a big hold of you that it does alter your mind and your perception, even of those around you. You read things into situations. Your belief systems start to change and to alter and fracture, and you literally can feel like your inner being is ripping apart, and that's phenomenally lonely. So you can be surrounded and yet feel on your own. The truth can be that you've got multiple people around you, but you feel on your own. And that's why I'm so passionate about how do we speak hope to people in that place? How do we walk alongside people in that place? How do we reveal God's love to people in that space?
So So I'm just thinking, you start this thing. You're a novice. You haven't got a clue on one level what you're on about, but and it's grown spectacularly. All the more probably because of COVID and what that threw up in terms of needs and stuff.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit about that journey. Now it's quite a big operation.
Yeah. So as I said, we started with choirs, and the hilarious thing, but not hilarious. Going into COVID, we had your worst business model you can imagine, which was to bring vulnerable people together to sing. And I don't know if you remember, but choirs were banned. They were the last thing to come back. Yeah. Restaurants were back before choirs were back. And had this really interesting moment in March where I was kind of like, do we try and take our choirs online? Is that what you're asking us to do in this season, God? Just to maintain and try and survive a global phenomenon that's going on and not a good one. And also at the time I was working alongside, I'd say working, but was in close relationship alongside with Kingsgate eldership team. And Keith, who's their pastor, said to me, Sarah, I really want you to consider about how we respond to the pandemic as a church and think about what does the community really need at this point. And I took that really seriously because it also coupled with what I was praying about, God, as a charity, a fledgling charity, we're not even 1 year old at this point. What is it that you're asking us to do in this space? What is it that our community needs? And I talked to our wonderful voluntary action, Kingston Voluntary Action, and talked to, people in the council. And I really felt at that point that there was a real need for food provision. Bearing in mind, I'd again, never worked in food provision at all. And I started to just inquire about that, look into that, and discover that Kingston really had no Meals on Wheels approach. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I was really aware that the people we were drawing into our choirs and our spaces, often we fed them. As I said, we had a big heart to build community. So we do refreshments or we do lunches. And so there was a choir, but there was also space to really build relationship, and just highly aware at that point that for all those people that went into community spaces, whatever they were, all of that was going to stop. Mm-hmm. And the health and the nutrition that they accessed was just going to disappear overnight. And often when people are struggling with physical and mental health, nutrition is a really difficult thing to handle. And you look at people who have dementia, when they go to their day centres, for example, they provide them with a healthy, substantial meal at lunchtime. And then, they might go home and have some toast, but that all was going to disappear. So in my sort of small thinking, I was like, how do we just maybe do Meals on Wheels for the people that we know that have already been accessing our services? So thinking, we're maybe going to do 100 meals a week type thing. And so Kingsgate Church and ourselves at Voices of Hope sort of came together over that, because Kingsgate's a great venue as well to maybe mobilize a bit more food operation. And we've been running some of our choirs in their building anyway. So it's like, okay, let's do this together. And so we naively go, let's start cooking, 50 to 100 meals a week. Anyway, to cut a long story short, we ended up with a massive food hub response. And that really catapulted me into the world of partnership work. Mm-hmm. And the value of working in partnership across organisations. Yeah. So our local council, I have to say, is phenomenal. I think that our council workers are absolutely brilliant. Mm-hmm. And we were part of this kind of rapid response team. And as I said, our voluntary action were fantastic as well. And local businesses joined the cause. And if you remember at the time, everyone was furloughed, and we became the place that one of the places that lots of people wanted to volunteer at. And chefs were furloughed, and all these chefs were kind of like, I want to help. And we had waiting lists for volunteers. And before we knew it, we were running this big operation where we had 18 to 20 fridges and freezers, a weekly sort of over 100 volunteers. And we were delivering I think at our peak, over 1,800 meals a week into the
Wow.
local community. And we had a
Brilliant.
triage system set up with the council. So literally anybody could be triaged, and food requirements and everything was labelled. So then we're into food hygiene and allergies, and let alone the fact, Simon, that at this point we had no funding for this.
Wow.
No funding at all. So it's not like as a charity we were sat on this nest egg of, oh, we have sort of £50,000 to do this, you know, or whatever you think might be a reasonable amount to do 1,800 meals every single week and set up all the systems and processes and the delivery structure and.
Yeah.
I watched as God, like, miraculous. The best way, it's the story of feeding the 5,000. I watched as God just provided in the most incredible, miraculous ways. And as God brought our community together to serve at a real point of need. And that was just the most phenomenal thing to be a part of. And also during that period, we started to really hear about families that were struggling. If you remember, families who get free school meals suddenly weren't getting free school meals, and there was no provision for that in, you know, families just were at home. And we were hearing stories of families that were struggling to eat healthily. We were worried about the nutrition that they were receiving and the risk of malnutrition in families, and also the fact that quite a lot of families didn't have devices, they didn't have gardens, they didn't have fun things to do. And to be honest, we just had this idea. What about, because bear in mind we had so much surplus, we had food coming out of our ears. We literally at one point, there was an amazing business that donated us a ton of salmon, sushi grade salmon, a ton, like a metric ton, and not just a ton of salmon. I mean a metric ton of salmon. We're like, what the heck do we do with all this food, you know? And because restaurants were opening, closing, we took all the surplus of local restaurants and businesses, and we filled our freezers up like you would not believe. So we were hearing these stories of families and like, okay, how do we really support families at this point? And came up with this idea of healthy meal kits for families, but that were aimed at teaching children how to cook healthy meals. So it gives children a fun activity to do, but also it really supports the whole family unit with a healthy, nutritious meal. And so that's where the idea of one of our biggest projects at the moment called Bright Box came from. Bright, spelled BRITE, and stands for Building Resilience in Today's Environment. So building resilience in families in today's sort of current climate of food insecurity, malnutrition, and really intersecting that need in families. And that was a very small concept, a little seed, and it took flight. And, you know, now that project is supporting around 700 families every week in different boroughs, mainly in London, but also further afield in the UK. And that's how we as a charity pivoted into food, from choirs, which I do admit is quite a stretch. But it was to actually really, again, that's what our community needed. It's what we felt best communicated God's love to people around us. Yeah. And as I said, to see the working behind it of God was, for me, was nothing short of miraculous. Yeah. And I am so thankful that I got to be a part of that and see that. And we did disband that kind of emergency food provision, the Meals on Wheels, as people went back into the community. We gradually reduced that because as a charity, the last thing you want to do is create dependency. And so what we did is we helped people to reintegrate back into their community provision and gradually tailed that off. But we stayed with a much more sustainable impacting project with Brightbox, and that continues to this day. But then sort of as we started to come out of COVID and things opened up, one of the things that we'd heard through our sisterhood choir, I said that's a choir, it's for all women, but we really advertise and try and reach women that have been through abuse and are facing long-term physical and mental health issues. And so we were hearing quite a lot of stories from that group of women that were around the increase of domestic violence, the increase of mental health difficulties, the problems potentially accessing services because everyone was overwhelmed coming out of the pandemic. And we approached our local violence against women and girls team and said, what would you think about us running Kingston Women's Hub, a partnership of organisations where we bring together crisis response, community sessions for women. We do one-to-one intervention work, and we do a lot of referral work, and we bring the key partners that want to come together in that space to provide a service that to the women coming, it feels like one service, but we play to the strengths of each organisation that wants to be a part of that. Because we hear a lot from people that are facing either long-term recovery from domestic violence or long-term conditions, that there's a lot of trauma around accessing one service, telling your story, building up trust, having the bravery to do that, and then effectively being sort of, I don't want to use the word dumped, but to the person it can feel like you're being kind of like dumped onto another service and you have to start again. You have to tell your story all over again. You have to build the relationships all over again. That is phenomenally difficult, and it puts so many barriers to recovery journeys. And everyone in this sort of sector will be very aware of that, and they'll be, if they're listening, they'll go yeah to that, and so really felt there was a wisdom of bringing a partnership together. And we spoke to different organizations in our local area, and everyone's like, yes, this feels like a really, really good idea. And so coming out of the pandemic as well, we also were hearing about the increase in domestic violence. People have been locked up. Abuse had increased during that time, as you probably could anticipate. And so we started, I think it was 2021, Kingston Women's Hub. And that's, as I said, that partnership of organisations to really bring a holistic, long-term approach to tackling abuse and domestic violence. And we've really seen that grow and thrive over the last couple of years in quite an incredible way. And it's now supporting, kind of over 350 women every year. And that includes that crisis response to domestic violence. It includes one-to-one support where we do pastoral support, advocacy support. It includes peer mentoring from women who've been through abuse, supporting other women. It includes community sessions like the choir. And we do something called the Sisterhood Sanctuary that Kingsgate Church runs, where it's like a well-being pampering session with the key message that every woman is worth treasuring. We run Pilates, we run Cook and Dines, on all of those are women-only spaces in terms of the community activities. And we see women build these incredibly rich relationships and do such beautiful recovery journeys in that space. And there's one lady actually, and she gave me permission to share her story. She's called Maddie, and she's beautiful. And she's really battled with anxiety and depression since childhood and struggled with PTSD. And she experienced like psychological, emotional and physical and sexual abuse throughout childhood. And then later as an adult, she married an alcoholic who was emotionally and sexually abusive. And she came to our specialist women's services and joined the choir. So she didn't come to the crisis. So she came to the choir because she loves to sing. And then she joined the Sisterhood Sanctuary wellbeing session, and watching her confidence grow has just been amazing. And last year, she stood up in front of 300 people to share her story of recovery from abuse. And she received a standing ovation. And she would say that for her finally broke through the shame and the stigma that she had been carrying about being abused. And her story has been such a huge inspiration to other women. And she's become a key person helping provide peer mentoring and support to other women in a hub. She's joined our survivor forums and has used her experiences of abuse to help plan services, even been involved in some of the groundwork behind training the Met Police. And it's just amazing. And it's been instrumental in the co-produced strategy that we've been doing in Kingston with the council to tackle violence against women and girls. And she sent me this beautiful quote, which I think is just worth reading out. She said this: "All of this shows me that positive can come out of negative and painful experiences. I used to be quiet and hope that I wouldn't be noticed. Now, I enjoy a rich life of laughter, song, fun, and enjoyment." I mean, this just like fills me with such joy. My suffering has become a passion to help others who have suffered and still are suffering, and to make the world a better place for us in whatever small way I can.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Isn't that beautiful? It just amazes me what God can do. There's another lady called Tracy, and she was, I think, the first person to walk through the doors of the Sisterhood Choir. And she came early, 15 minutes early, and she sat on the sofa and told me about how she'd just come out of domestic violence, and horrendous domestic violence. And she's been very open about her story. And I remember walking through the doors going, I didn't think I'd ever come through the doors of a church again. she didn't quite say I hate church, but both her and her ex-husband had gone to Bible college together. They'd been involved in leading a church. This is over in Northern Ireland. And she went from being highly respected in church to in a toxic domestic violence relationship where her very life was in danger. And the sense of losing both her faith and her community, and obviously her relationship, and her whole life going to nothing was huge. And she was struggling with PTSD. She was put in a hostel, a 1-bedroom hostel. And when I visited that hostel, my heart was absolutely broken to see a mum and 2 young children in a 1-bedroom. And I was just like, how can this be? How can this be in the UK? And how do we love her in this space? And she was miles away from ever wanting to step into a church service. And if I started preaching, you need to give your life back to Jesus, she would have walked right out the door. But she joined a choir and reconnected with God in the most incredible way. And again, the long journey summary of that is she has come alive again. Her confidence has rebuilt. She has a passion to want to tell her story of recovery and to help other women in that space and come alongside other women in that space. And she's given her life back to God. She's become a member back in church, and she's rediscovered her faith and her passion for Jesus and her relationship with God that, when she walked through the door, I don't think was ever even on the cards, and seeing her journey has been amazing. And she's a really close friend, and I love her dearly. And she's such an inspiration to me personally. And that's been beautiful to see that restoration journey and to see God restore the damage that man did, not just to her, but to her understanding of God and her walk with God and her knowledge of God. Seeing God restore that has been one of the most precious things for me over the last few years.
Wonderful. Hey folks, most of you know that this podcast comes out under the auspices of Great Lakes Outreach, which is a charity we started 20 plus years ago, working in Burundi, which is currently the hungriest country in the world and either the poorest or second poorest, vying with South Sudan. So it's in a hell of a mess, desperate needs. And listen, as we come up towards Christmas, I think of Alice, who I did a film of, who She's a Mutwa pygmy, very, very poor, and her 6-year-old daughter was sick, and she knew she needed to get her to the hospital, but she couldn't afford the few pounds it would take to do that. So she tried to scrounge some money off her neighbours. They were equally poor. They couldn't. So she set about making a clay pot, which is what her trade was, and it took her 2 days to make that pot. And in the meantime, her 6-year-old daughter died. Oh, it just makes me, mixture of emotions, sad, angry, all sorts, because for the lack of those few pounds, that precious 6-year-old died. That is so wrong. In Burundi, we can provide for £3.50 or $4, we can provide people with a medical card that means that when they go to the hospital, they get treated immediately. It lasts a year, £3.50. or £4 covers the whole family. And what I love about this appeal at Christmas is that my kids can afford to get one. They get 1 or 3 or 5 or 10. Would you be interested in doing that? If you'd like to help a family to have peace this Christmas and the coming year, knowing that they won't, or their loved ones won't die for the lack of just a few pennies, then go to greatlakesoutreach.org/inspired. And also, if you wanted, for example, their alternative Christmas gifts, when I'm asked at Christmas, what do you want by loved ones? I say, look, just get me some reusable sanitary pads for girls for £10 for a pack there, or a goat for £25, or a bike for a rural pastor for £70, or £150 will get a sewing machine so that woman can get out of prostitution. I mean, what's not to like? So those are just a few of the alternative gifts that we offer this Christmas time. If you'd like to, again, greatlakesoutreach.org/inspired. Thanks so much for your consideration. Thanks so much for your support and encouragement in general of this podcast. Now, let's get back to it. I love your choir stuff. Interestingly enough, just this summer, I was preaching at Lee Abbey, and there was a couple called Sam and Rachel Chaplin who came along, and they are both, star high quality musicians. He actually runs a choir with the homeless in a different part of London. And anyway, he got us numpties, up there. And only those who wanted to, but I was like, I'm all in. I mean, my voice is okay, but nothing to write home about. And he, over 3 days, they just got this most glorious sound. And even after the first session, it was like, whoa, that was such a spiritual experience. Getting you in touch with your body, your breathing, your whole sense of, who you are. It was so powerful. And I can imagine you with these different groups of very broken, damaged people, them flourishing. Do you want to talk a bit more on that?
Oh, I'd love to. So choirs, they do have this amazing ability to bring people together, and you get these amazing moments. Like some of it, is the hardcore of, let's pronounce our words clearly and project our voice. But then you get these moments where the whole choir knits together, and it is really powerful. And with our choirs, they are quite a neutral space. We have a mixture of songs. All of our songs are uplifting and full of truth. And we sometimes thread in gospel songs, and, because gospel is a genre. Talking about Tracy again, we did this song. She actually asked if we could do a song called Oceans by Hillsong. And if you know the chorus of that, it goes, Spirit lead me or the bridge, Spirit lead me where my trust is beyond borders. Let me walk upon the waters, wherever you may call me. And we actually got her to do a solo in that. And I watched as we sang that, and the presence of God just came into the room. There's no other way to describe it. In fact, some of the members who aren't Christians, and most of them aren't, at that point, I remember we stopped, and they were like, and some of them were like, oh, I have goosebumps all over. And I'm like, that's the presence of God right here. But I've seen as people just start to sing that they're actually worshiping before they even know they're worshiping, which is really quite an interesting dynamic. And what's beautiful is when people come from choir and they, at some point, not everybody, but when those that do come into church, it's the easiest transition because they've got used to singing together, and even that sense of worshiping together. And it's just beautiful to see. And I remember as well, this is a different story, but I remember I was in a dementia centre and we were doing Amazing Grace because we quite often thread hymns into those sessions because our older people know them, and it's a really brilliant cognitive thing to do for people with dementia, to sing songs that they know, and hymns are right in there. So I talked about the story of Amazing Grace and how it comes out of the slave trade, and it's talking, about a slave trade owner who is actually going, oh, amazing grace that could even save a wretch like me. And I said, did you know this is a story behind this hymn? And we talked about it. And then we sang it again. And I watched as this 90-year-old man who had up to this point had been telling me that he didn't have a faith in God or whatever, put his hand on his heart, closed his eyes and sang.
Oh, beautiful.
And the amazing thing is that was before the pandemic. And during the pandemic, he actually rang me. I'm in this amazing moment of leading him to Jesus.
Oh,
honestly, incredible moment of leading him to Jesus. And a few months later, he died.
Love that.
Isn't that awesome? Yeah. I think I'm just like, only Jesus can do this. Yeah. Only God can do this. And I think sometimes for me, providing spaces where people can do the journey that God has them on, rather than us trying to dictate the journey we want them to be on. And for me, choirs have become this amazing catalyst place that people can do that in. And there's another lady called Willow. Again, really good friend of mine now, and she's just brilliant. And when she came into choir, again, a history, and she's given me permission to share this. She has a history of childhood sexual abuse. She then was in a very hard domestic violence relationship, and she wasn't a Christian when she came to the choir. She also has neurodiversity, and that had been a real struggle for her, combined with trauma. And she came to the choir really depressed, really downtrodden. And watching her journey has been amazing. She just found relationships and community and a sense of belonging, and like she was coming home. And I think that was more significant to her maybe than the singing was. But then I invited her to church several months in. We'd been having quite a lot of conversations, just one-on-one. And she came, and this is kind of how she would describe it. She said, I walked into love.
Come on.
I walked into love. And she would say this. In fact, whenever anybody asks her, how did you join the Winners Hub or that kind of thing, she will tell this story straight up. So I came to choir, and then Sarah invited me to church. And this can be in the middle of a whole, meeting with council members and all sorts of things. And I'm there going, this is awesome. She'll be like, I came to church and I encountered love like I've never encountered before. And then I sat for weeks just crying my eyes out as I experienced the love of God. And I'm just like, this is phenomenal. And then again, just had the privilege of leading her to Jesus a few weeks into that, and just watched as the Holy Spirit filled her. And then she got these visions of nature and just the Holy Spirit. I could go on and on, but seeing the journey in her life, it's amazing, absolutely beautiful. And again, she's just such a core part of what we do now. She actually is part of, we have a super seniors team with some of our women who go with our choir tutors into the dementia centres, into the care homes, and befriend and sit alongside and love on the older people. And that transformation journey of one life is, I could talk about that for an hour, Simon. Just amazing.
Yeah. And those women will be the best at it because they understand it the most because they've lived it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Have you had any really antagonistic people come and then being melted by love?
We have actually. We've had, I don't know if antagonistic is the right word, actually. I think one of the things that we don't necessarily understand that well in church is the impact of trauma. And what can feel like somebody being antagonistic is actually somebody who's in trauma, and they trigger all over the place. So I have seen people come in. I remember there's one person who came in, and it was really bizarre, actually. They were really angry, and it was a really busy session that we were running. They said the furniture is just, I feel like everything is bullying me. The people, the furniture, the noise, I feel like I'm being bullied. And I was like, this is bizarre. They were quite aggressive, actually. And I was like, what is going on right now? And I suddenly was like, they're triggering. They are overwhelmed by all the stimulus, all the noise, all the people. It's too busy. And what I said to him was like, let's talk properly. Can we go to a quieter space and let's really unpack what's troubling you right now? And they just de-escalated as we went into another room, and we sat and talked. And actually what had happened that week, this is somebody who'd lived on the streets, is their life had been threatened that week. And I think they'd actually been attacked, if I remember correctly. And that had heightened all sorts of PTSD and fear for them. And they just triggered as they walked into the room. And it reminded me, to be honest, Simon, of some of my journey. And like, I have a history of childhood sexual abuse. And when I was dealing with PTSD a few years back, that really came to the forefront for me, of dealing with the abuse that I'd walked through. And it was part of, I think, some of the PTSD as well. And I was getting a lot of flashbacks, a lot of memories. It was really quite horrendous to walk through. And it was so difficult, because I remember walking into Kingsgate Church, and there was a whole massive room full of people, and I just couldn't stay there. I couldn't stay in a room full of people. It was too triggering, too many people I didn't know, too much going on. It felt so unsafe. And this was nothing to do with the church. This was to do with me and what was going on in me internally. And I remember, because for me, abuse happened in the context of church. And I remember talking to both Keith, who I mentioned before, and Paul, who's one of the other leaders, and saying, I have a real problem trusting church leadership. Right now, I don't feel like I can trust church leadership. And their wisdom was just like some I haven't heard before. And they said to me, that's fine. You don't have to trust us. It's our job to earn your trust. And I was like, what? I'd come from an environment before that where I had felt like trust was demanded of me. And when I didn't do what people wanted, it was really difficult. And for somebody to go around and to actually say to me, do you know what? It's our job to earn your trust. It's fine. Don't worry. You're off the hook. And I watched as a church community over a period of years earned my trust. And that included it being absolutely fine for me to walk into church and walk out again 10 minutes later, and they still loved me. It looked like them being on the end of the phone in some really dark nights. It looked like me, because I was, I haven't talked about it much yet, but I do have a long-term chronic condition where every year of my life I've ended up in hospital one way or another. And it looks like them supporting me through some really dark times, and not minding if we have some sofas in church. Great call, if you ask me. It looked like them not blinking an eyelid if I went to church and lay on the sofa and slept through the whole thing, and just left feeling a little bit better because I'd actually just been in the presence of God. It looked like me flipping out about the smallest thing, ending up in floods of tears, and then sitting and walking that through with me and talking it through with me.
Yeah.
And I say that because that gives me an understanding when people who come across as antagonistic, who come across as difficult, who come across as defensive, to take a step back and go, actually, how can we love this person in that space and really understand what's going on and walk with them through it?
That's really helpful, because my church, St Andrew's Community Church, very proud of it on Foxhill. We've got quite a few people that are, have been through a lot in their lives and are very wounded and damaged. And it's good to. I mean, I think of one lady who I was really excited about seeing sort of what I thought was growing, and then obviously I just. It's just an innocent thing of taking food around to her house, and she was so offended and triggered in a different way that I would want to help her out, and it was almost like game over on the friendship. And it's like, maybe hurt people. There's a lot of damage in there, and we've just got to be able to be consistent and take the ups and the downs, and them know that we're still there. We're running out of time, but you mentioned your illness. I just think it's very powerful how the Lord's used you. I mean, I'm guessing you'll echo Paul's, 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take this away from me, this thorn in the flesh. And he said, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I'll boast all the more about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. And that's been a long-term thing for you, hasn't it? And God's used you in your brokenness. Can you speak on that a bit?
Yeah, I was diagnosed when I was 22. I'm now 45. So when I say it's a long-term condition, it is long-term. So I have something called gastroparesis, where I have nerve damage to my stomach, so my stomach doesn't work, and it has variations with that. And there's times when that's really chronic, and I end up in hospital needing electrolyte replacements, IVs, and sometimes tube feeding. So you can put tubes up through your nose and bypass your stomach and into your small intestine, called NJ, nasojejunal tube feeding. And I've had periods where I've been on that for short periods or longer periods over months. But living with a long-term condition has some real challenges to it. It has challenges to it in just physical energy levels. Like, I'm such an energetic person. So to not have energy because of lack of nutrition, I really find hard. I was one of those kids my parents gave up trying to make me sleep through the night because I would just get up and play with my toys. They just gave up, apparently. So I'm by nature a highly motivated, energetic person. And my normal is a day that I don't need to sleep is abnormal. I really struggle with energy levels, and I get very, very tired, and I am sick on a daily basis. And that's my norm. Right. And then, as I said, when it gets worse, that's when I end up in hospital, often for several weeks at a time. And then I find the tube procedures and the placements of those and endoscopy very traumatic. And so I had periods when, if I get a lot of those back to back, where I could end up feeling like I'm slipping back into PTSD and trauma again. And it does. I'm actually in a really good space with God on this one at the moment, but that's been a long, long journey of learning to trust God, that he loves me and he is good, even though I haven't seen healing. Yeah. Because I actually fundamentally believe in a God who heals. I believe in, by his stripes, we are healed. And so to find a place of peace where I still believe that God is good, even though I haven't seen that healing in my life, has been a battle. Hands up, has been a battle. But what it has worked for me, and it's been a similar journey to working through abuse, what it has, as I've come through that, what it has worked in me is this kind of trusting God that actually, God, you're good and you have an ability to work things for good. Like, you cannot believe. Like, I look at what God has done in Voices of Hope, and hilariously in the areas of food and malnutrition, which is at the absolute, essence of my my physical condition. You know, I get tired because of malnutrition. You know, I lose weight rapidly because of malnutrition, and I have to have tube feeding because of malnutrition. And it's all about malnutrition. And what is Brightbox if not trying to tackle malnutrition? I'm just like, you know, so the very areas of that, and, you know, helping other people to recover from abuse and long-term physical, mental health, and do that hardcore journey around some of those things, they actually they have become like such a fruit out of areas that have been such a struggle and a battle. Yeah. And I've given a fight to want to, I don't know how to put this apart from smack the enemy one, where he's attacked my life, you know? And I do want to encourage, you know, people that are listening, that the very thing that the enemy comes at you with, you know, in John 10:10, where it says the enemy comes to rob, kill, destroy, but I have come to give life in abundance. And I think sometimes the very areas the enemy wants to come and rob, kill, destroy, all those very areas that you can see an abundance of God's life flow through into other people. And I honestly can say this, I wouldn't swap that for the world.
Wow.
I would not swap. I would swap having, you know, not gone through abuse and not having a long-term condition. But if going through that has meant that it's given me a passion and a strength and a tenacity, or whatever you want to call it, for this area of work, I wouldn't swap it.
And that's profound to be able to say, because I had 2 years of chronic fatigue way back, you know, about a decade ago, and I was like, Lord, please, may I never go through that again. So, yes, I mean, there are a lot of people dealing with long-term sickness, so that is a massive encouragement to hear. God bless you. So maybe my last question for us listening, you know, a sort of call to action. What would you want us to hear?
Good question. I think just, if I link it into what I was just saying, is ask God in your heart, like, what is the seed that you can plant? Whether that is a seed of something you've been through, something that you're passionate about, what is the small thing that you can take and really start to plant in the ground? Because all that I've talked about in terms of what Voices of Hope is now, and it's reaching over 3,000 people on a weekly basis now. And
wonderful.
Which is amazing. But it started with this little seed of let's bring people together to show them how they can do something that they love and be part of a community and reveal the love of God. It was a tiny seed, Simon, little thing. And I think sometimes seeds can be so small that we can discount them and go, well, that's not going to do much, is it? But if you have a passion for God and a passion for others, and you take a small seed, you will be amazed at what God can do through it. Or if you have been through adversity, whatever that adversity is, maybe it's not domestic violence, but maybe it's your marriage has fallen to pieces and you're disillusioned with that whole concept of marriage. Maybe it's that you're single. I'm single. Just for those of you that are listening that are single. Maybe it's that you're single and you had a dream for marriage and you're like, but I'm on my own. What can my life do? Or maybe it's that you have been through abuse or long-term physical. What is the adversity you've been through, and how can that be a seed of passion to reach out, to help others and to love others? Or maybe it's you are in church or in a community space. And I challenge myself with this all the time. And how do we walk for the long haul with people and seek to listen, to learn, to understand, and to reveal love to them, and to actually really do that side by side Samaritan journey that costs us? You know, it costs a good Samaritan to do that journey with the person who's beaten up on the roadside. And can we be prepared for the cost of walking alongside people? And just to encourage us in that, as well as, if, you know, to have that heart for the one beside us. I've told you stories today that are actually more about the one than the overall impact of a charity. And what reaches your heart is going to be in that story of the one. And I want to encourage each of us that on an ongoing basis, we can be that story for the one. We can reach out for the one. And I think what a privilege and what a joy to be part of those stories.
Wonderful. Sarah Clay, you're an absolute star. God bless you. God bless your team. God bless Voices of Hope, and just cheering you on all the way. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Simon. It's been a pleasure.
Wonderful. Guys, we'll stick it's voh.org.uk. That's their website. If you want to be in touch and find out more or help out in any way, that'd be great to push you that way. Please share this podcast with someone else that needs encouragement. Give us a great review on Spotify or iTunes. I want to thank Adam Thomas Steer for the editing, Mike Sandeman for the mixing. Next week, another fantastic episode. Meantime, God bless you and toodaloo.